Hi everyone, welcome to the second video in the series of videos about how to embed ICT and also sustainability in geography education. In this video, we'll be specifically looking at satellite photography and how we can use satellite photos in our teaching with middle primary years students. So what we'll be looking at in this video is what is satellite photography, how can we use satellite photography in the classroom with middle primary students, and where can we go to access satellite photographs as resources for our class. So what is satellite photography? Well, as the name suggests, it's images taken from satellites. In the previous video, we learnt about the global positioning system, so the system of satellites orbiting the Earth. Similarly, we have satellites orbiting the Earth taking photographs of the world. So these can be images of the whole world, so the world as a whole, or parts of the world or specific geographical regions. The satellites use a combination of cameras and sensors and infrared devices to create images of the Earth's surface. Satellite photography is a form of remote sensing. It's a geospatial technology which is about being able to take images of the Earth's surface from satellites and other forms of aircraft. Satellite photography is a really simple way of visualizing and representing change processes over the time and how that has impacted on the Earth's surface. So one really cool thing that you can do with your students is to show them maps of an area, so perhaps older maps, historical maps, and then also show them satellite photography of the same area. And it's very easy and very obvious some of the changes that have happened over time to the land based on human occupation and that type of human impact. The really great thing about satellite photography, if you're working in a school that has limited technology resources, is that the photographs can always be printed. So you can print them and use them with students and actually use that technology, but in perhaps a more traditional way that takes into account some of those constraints about technology access in the classroom. So how can we use satellite photography for geography? Here I've taken a Year 3 example from the HASS curriculum. In the statement it says students develop an understanding of the similarities and differences between places within and outside of Australia through a study of their environmental and human characteristics. So focus on the geographical concept of place. You can here use satellite photography to describe, to hypothesize, so draw conclusions, ask questions, and explain the differences between somewhere like Hobart in Tasmania and Beijing in China. What I'm going to do now is to quickly show you how we can use some satellite photography. And the easiest way to use satellite photography in the classroom is actually to use it via Google Maps. Now, Google Maps is probably something that you guys are all pretty familiar with. If not, it is the Google mapping platform that you can find online. Most maps online these days are actually attached to Google Maps or are driven by Google. So it's likely that if you've seen an interactive map online that it's at least come from Google Earth, Google Maps. So I've just put up Google Maps, and this is essentially what you'll see when you first come to Google Maps. Okay, so you can see the URL up there, so google.com.au/maps. So what we're going to do our comparison and to examine our satellite photography, first thing I'm going to do is check out Hobart. Okay, so Hobart's pretty easy. You type it into the text box. Hobart TAS is going to pre-populate. And so let's check out Hobart. So because we're using the Google Maps platform, the first thing we see is a map. So we can obviously see the map here of Hobart. We can zoom in and out, and we can interact with this map. Now, to check out that satellite imagery, what we need to do is actually to refer to the Google Earth platform that sits behind Google Maps, and we can see very clearly that it's here in the corner. So we want to click on that, and that's going to switch us to the satellite image. Okay, so this is a satellite image of Hobart, and again we can zoom in and out, which gives you a really great perspective on the population density of Hobart. You know, just how many people do we think live in a square kilometre in Hobart? We can see that it's fairly dense in that CBD area, but the further we move out, we can see that it becomes significantly less dense, that housing. There's not as many houses in Hobart compared to other large cities. Okay, and that's an interesting observation for students to make. The other thing that we can see when we look at the satellite imagery is that Hobart's population is very heavily concentrated on the eastern and western shores of the River Derwent. Okay, we can see that there is quite a bit of housing density around this Rosny Park, Bellarive kind of area, and along past Howrah and Tranmere. You can see that there's quite a lot of houses there. We can see that it's quite dense in the CBD kind of area, extending right out to Kingston and Blackmans Bay in the south. We can also see that those northern suburb areas, Glenorchy, Moona, Rosetta, for example, are also quite heavily populated. We can also see that the city of Hobart is hemmed in by the river, but also by the mountains, so Mount Wellington, here, and those are two geographical features that really define Hobart and have an impact on where human settlements actually happen in the city. So students can make all sorts of observations and draw all sorts of conclusions about the geographical characteristics or features of Hobart by looking at this spatial satellite imagery. Similarly, when we want to compare Hobart with Beijing, easy enough again to search for Beijing, if I can spell. Yep. So here we go, and that map is also obviously going to move to Beijing, and while we allow it to load, we can quite easily see straight away that our comparison is able to very much talk about the differences in population density or the differences in where humans live in Beijing compared to where humans live along the River Derwent in Hobart. Okay, so we can of course zoom in very closely to the center of Beijing. One of the really awesome things about satellite imagery, particularly in the Google Earth platform, is that we can get very close. Okay, so we can look really closely, and although it's not a satellite image as such, we can of course pick up the little guy in the corner, which will allow us to do the street view that Google also produces. So let's, for example, jump into this street and see, or not. No, I tell a lie, it won't actually allow me to do that. Interesting thing about technology sometimes is that it doesn't always work the way you want it to. Be prepared for that when you get into the classroom. But obviously we can also zoom out and see that Beijing is quite an inland city. So we can see that it's quite a distance from the shore, quite a distance from the sea. It doesn't have a natural access point, it doesn't have a port that we can see here, and that is again another contrast that we can make between Beijing and China. It's really good to get your kids to sit down and have a play with something like Google Maps. It's not all that difficult, and you can't really go wrong. So it's a great place to experiment and students, you will find, will probably come to your class with quite a bit of background knowledge about Google Maps or Google Earth platforms and how they can be used. So use your students, use them to your advantage. I know students in the past have certainly taught me a lot about spatial technologies, particularly Google Earth, because they like to play with them. They like to explore and experiment and see different places. While we're here looking at Google Maps / Google Earth, I might just point out a couple of quick things that are worthwhile having a look at. On the side here, you can't actually see it in my window of the screencast, but there's actually a double arrow that's just over here. If we click on that, we can actually see a bit of a tour, I suppose, of some photographs or imagery that has been posted up to Google Maps, usually from government sources. So it could be from NASA or from the local government, for example, that are quite useful and interesting to explore with your students in and of themselves. So for example, we've got a few photos here of Beijing that we can have a look at. And here is a ground view of Tiananmen Square. There are a whole range of really cool things that you can look at here in addition to just having a look at the map. So even if we want to return to the map, we can do that really easily too. Okay, so now that we've finished exploring Google Maps and Google Earth and what that can offer us in terms of demonstrating the different characteristics of place, I'd like to just quickly mention the links to sustainability. Every time I say that word, I always mess it up. Links to sustainability education. So for example, when you're exploring those different places, you can ask questions like, what is it like for people to live in Hobart and Beijing? What are the major environmental threats that you might consider in Tasmania and China? What strategies or solutions can you think of to address these threats? And how can people live sustainably in Hobart and Beijing? Finally, to end the video, I just want to talk about where we can access satellite photography to use in class. So obviously you can go to Google Earth and Google Maps, just like I've done today. A really quick image search in Google is likely to bring up an image that suits your purposes. So in Google image search, say for example Tasmania satellite photo, is going to probably bring you up an image that you don't actually need to go searching for. If you'd like to check out some websites where there's a range of satellite photos, you can always go to the Earth Resources Observation Center that's run by the US government. The NASA Visible Earth website and even the Bureau of Meteorology has a range of satellite images, which of course we see often on the television when we look at a weather broadcast. So there's lots of places where we can actually go to access those resources. Thanks for listening to this video. In the next one, so video 3, I'm going to be talking about Story Maps, which is an online web-based application that allows you to put a map together with a story or together with text. It's really quite an interesting resource. So I hope that you can join me in video 3. Thank you.